Some other things that resonated, continuing the discussion of the frame story of Season of Migration from the North. Some of the things that resonated for me in my reading of it was the time it takes to walk anywhere. I very much remember that though I lived in a village, you could cross in 5 minutes easily, unimpeded. It would take upwards of an hour to go from one side of the village to the other. So much so, one is time is spent in greeting and blessing people, and all the social obligations, which are very much the norm of village life there. Perhaps village life everywhere, for all I know. The granddad, they're trying to work out the age of the granddad at a certain point. In Kiro, the village where I lived, there was the government was a very remote entity that almost never impinged on the villagers' lives. I think they came twice ever. And one time was to do the census, which was quite interesting because people don't have documents, and they also don't do birthdays there. So most people might know what season they were born in, especially if their parents were living. But to work out the year, they would have to ask all kinds of questions about, was it before or after the French left? What hairstyles and dance styles were popular at the time, things of that nature. So that scene of working out the granddad's age really resonated as well. They talk at a certain point about Ifrits, which are these, beings between gods and men, I guess, which I think is a really apt symbol for these, our narrator and Mustafa, who are very much between, their English life and their African life, their Sudanese life. There's the notion of you would call them genie. The gene is very interesting because they have free will. And another important thing about them is so Ifrit is one of the. There's John, Ifrit, Nazna, Gul, Shaitan. These are the different elements, right? So Ifrit, I believe, are the fire ones. So that's important because Iblis, Shaitan, the Satan is the light. Usually it's a being of light, so also very much associated with that. There's all these really interesting symbolisms of in between. Mustafa's described as having an empty quarter face, his Arab side, along with this mischievous African head. Whatever is meant by mischievous there, I found that very interesting description. There is an idea, the literary group that I worked with in Mali was very, very fun. They called themselves the conscientious literary group. So the conscientism, that's a philosophy from Nkrumah, the independence leader, Nkrumah, and it says to choose consciously from the Afro-animist, the Islamic, as well as the European heritages that they have, to not reject or accept any of them wholesale, but to take the best of each. I would say that in these cases of some of these characters, some of these people are a little lost in that process. I want to get into so much as it's getting into out of the frame story and into Mustafa's account of himself. The hat, what he calls a turban, and the Englishman says, so you'll one day, you'll grow up, you'll wear this hat. As a really interesting symbolism, again, I think of acclamation, acculturation to European standards. So much more to say about this, but the machine has already cut me off once, and I promised I would only deal with the frame story, and I just wanted to get that out for the sake of the reading group, who I believe is having a discussion that you can turn into live on the 30th, so don't miss that. I probably will, as it'll probably be middle of the night here in Thailand, but If I do, as I hope to eventually finish reading this, I'll do another video on this fascinating novel. Well worth a look. Um, I'll end with just one story to deal with the crime element, which obviously I haven't touched on yet. And it goes back to the idea of Exodus. There was not crime at all in my village or in the area of hearing of my village, which would be everybody's movements and the movements of everybody else around them and where they intersected, in which there were social liaisons to exchange stories, which means basically the whole Falaise, the whole like Dogon, this one whole side of the Dogon escarpment and into probably maybe even as far as Jenne, the Bani River, and up into the desert. I heard of two crimes ever. One was a murder. It was a love triangle. And that boy went to jail but got out and escaped. The other was a fraud where someone came to my village and said that a bunch of the children had been injured or killed in a terrible bus accident. His mom, as he told it, had taken the children in because no one else wanted to deal with them because they're Malian kids, from far away. But she was Malian. He's Malian, he said. So they took him in, and they were happy to do so. But the medicines and the surgeries they needed some money. So she sent her son up to get help from the village, and the villagers were, of course, immediately willing to pay whatever to both recompense the helpful mother and provide for the health of their children. There was much weeping in the village that day, which the village was not a place where weeping was at all normal. Laughter, rather, was the soundtrack. So, unfortunately for this fellow with his story, I had a motorcycle, and which I was able to loan to someone who zoomed down to ostensibly to sell a cow, because of course no one has that much money to give him. So they do need to sell the cow, and they do set that in motion. But the person also goes on all the way down to check out this story. Turns out that all the children, I'm very happy to tell you, were, let me see thanks to God, all the children were healthy and safe and sound and working in this bus station, pushing, carrying cargo around, baggage and whatnot. And so I guess that this fellow had taken their information, at the time of pretending to employ them or whatever. He got their information, and so the kids were all fine. My buddy comes back on the motorcycle, and they tell, they sort of say to this guy, like, what? He's like, oh, look at the time. And the guy's like, oh, I really ought to be going. I've kept you too long. So they say to him, no, let us accompany you. You're weak and not used to the bush, being a city boy. Let us go with you. And of course, they took him on a cart. And this is what I was so pleased about, because one hears of these instances of like some hit and runs, people hitting, running over and killing children, especially in African cities. They'll drive off because the story is that if the mob catches them, they'll perhaps even kill the driver. They'll take immediate, swift, and violent justice. And I was afraid, like, oh no, don't let my village do that. But they didn't. They took him to the authorities. And not only that, he did end up in prison. I guess maybe because he was a foreigner, he couldn't, he didn't have the connections to get himself out. So the whole system worked from village to actual government. So that was, anyway, one of the perils of the life of Exodus and the connection of these tiny villages to this wider and bigger networks. That was in Kumasi. No, that was in that was in, might have been Abidjan. It might have been as far as Abidjan, or else it was in the north of the Ivory Coast where the kids were. But it also, I hope I want to tell you, really emphasize for me is that this sense of menace that hangs over, people's ideas of Africa, and is probably enhanced by this story of murder, was really a rarity. I mean, these stories are told for years and years and years, as you can imagine, and so I would have heard all of them for decades, and there just were very, very, very few instances of crime and things of that nature, at least in the traditional African context that I knew, which I'll just end with as saying one more time, may totally be, not applicable at all to season of migration to the north. But in case any of those little bits provide a little extra context for readers here or here, readers outside of Africa, I wanted to provide it. And Africans, especially Sudanese, but any who will hear me and probably catch tons of errors or oversimplifications or, wrong interpretations, please do comment and let everybody know the truth. So that's all I'm going to say about season of migration for the north for now. And thank you for indulging me in 2 videos because I pressed the wrong button and cut off my thing in the middle. And look for another video to follow when I finish reading this. Probably, though, not by the end of April. All right, thank you all. Come, Ben. See you.